welcome everybody, and thank you so much those who have made it in this heat. the strong people come out into the heat here. It's around 100 degrees, I think, in Las Vegas here. For those of you who are either doing this from live stream from the comfort of your home, or we'll see this on a recording later on. Namaskars to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy to be here in the Las Vegas Vedanta Center, and so we're going to start with a chant as we usually do, and then we'll continue with our subject for today. So, Om Brahma Pranam Brahma Havir Brahma No Brahmana Bhakam Brahme Bhakti Vedanta Yam Brahma Karma Samadhi Hari Om Tat Sat Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We usually use that prayer for food, but it's Brahman is the ritual, Brahman is the offering, Brahman is the one who offers to the fire that is Brahman. If one sees Brahman in every action, one will find Brahman. And that's actually kind of the topic of what we have here today. Although it's more of a flowery title, the weapons for the battle of life. You know, it's a very Gita, kind of, we ripped off the Gita for the kind of the title. But it's kind of the idea is this. So what can you use, and what do the teachers and the scriptures tell us that we should use to confront the reality of life in all its aspects and all of its complications and all of its different complexities? And there are certainly things that we need as a living being to be able to cope with being alive, whatever form of life you are, whether it's very simple of food, nurturing, protection, and all that kind of stuff from every form of life, to connection and nurturing and feeling, loved and all that sort of thing as you get higher to the level. But I think that's actually, it's something that runs through all of life. As we see even in simple life, there's ways that connection happens and that they feel connected, maybe more ways that we can understand. And then as you get more complex, there's more a need for stimulation and growth and understanding. And then when life evolves far enough and you have your own volition and you can move from plant to animal, there's this will, our own will of what we want to accomplish or what we choose to do, what we choose not to do, sometimes out of compulsion, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of just pure desire. And so then it gets into this whole complexity of, okay, so what should you do? How do you array yourself for all of these choices? And how do you evolve? I mean, what's the whole point of this? What is the ideal? And Swami Vivekananda, we'll read some from Swamiji in a little while here, but he, in Paramahansa Vedanta and Sri Kishore, all the great ones talk about this great evolutionary plan of creation. And you see more and more complex things from the time of elements combining to create more complex elements, and then stars creating heavy metals and all these types of things that were created before, and more complexity, until there is actually life as we kind of understand it, where there's a spark of a living organism, a living thing that exists and then stops existing and has some form of consciousness and reproduction in the way we define life, a consciousness of some sort, until it becomes more and more complex, from simple matter, simple complex, simple things, plant, mineral, single cell organisms, then to fish, life in the seas that started, to things crawling out onto the to the earth, and having the lizards and the cold-blooded organisms, and then mammals, and the complexities that created, and having a need for more mobility and more choice, and then when we got to the point of having a ape-like monkey type of a being, they say, now you have a gray matter of the brain that allowed for independent thought and decision in a sense, whereas before it was more an instinct. Mass karma, they talk about the animals having a mass karma, because they don't have an individual choice in things. They don't have that ability. The chakras aren't all the 7 chakras are in the animals. Then they say as man was evolved or created, and especially this body was created, it was designed so that man would have the ability to not only have the brain and functioning ability, but the spinal chakras, the energy centers, to manifest all of these qualities that we have in an understanding in our world of what divine qualities are. So you have compassion, and you have a reason, and you have the ability of thinking not just for yourself but for others, and not just in an intuitive sense of a clan, but in a larger sense of connection to people who are not associated with you, not part of your tribe or clan or whatever it is, your group of collective. And then you have abstract thought and concepts, being able to understand all the things that are beyond the senses, beyond simple experience and simple stimuli. And so, Swamiji talks about, and Yoganandaji and all the great ones, write in their books that, as man evolves, there is this ability to express more and more of the divine qualities, more and more of the pure stretch of what a God-man would be, and these super abilities, things that we would maybe not even relate to yet in our evolution, of being able to control the body in a complete way, be able to have it serve you and not be attached to it, and so on. And where consciousness is separated from the body, and you have absolute understanding of different realities, not just this particular one that is here on Earth. So there's all of these things that go on, and it's quite an interesting thing when you look at the scriptures of India, especially because they give us a glimpse that hasn't been preserved in other cultures and other civilizations. They say that they existed alongside all together in this early higher ages of civilization, where all of these things that I'm talking about were common knowledge, more or less, to the masses of people. And all of the religions reflected these higher understandings of human consciousness and what the divine spark inside of each man and all that sort of thing. And then it was, as the yugas were in, they call this a descending, there was a descending cycle where man lost all of that ability in general. And the masses of beings lost the ability of understanding and remembering who they were, what their connections were, what their identity was. And so, of course, there's other groups of souls evolving and coming into this world and evolving to that stage. But so there's these cycles going on and around and around. But there's those supermen who can skip beyond the cycles and understand and keep this understanding no matter what the outside physical circumstances are. And I think that's kind of the idea, isn't it? Where the idea of Advaita, they said, to eliminate suffering and even the possibility of suffering. That's the goal of Advaita Vedanta. Even the possibility of its occurrence. And so this is interesting, because if this Hindu scriptures are correct, and there's a 24,000 year cycle of ascending, 12,000 years ascending age, 12,000 year descending age into more chaos and dark ages, and then the whole cycle again, then there is mass of people that come to a higher understanding and then they lose it. And then they come to a higher understanding and then they lose it again. And they say that, you have had countless lives, not just a few. So this is something that, if there's this ebb and flow of understanding, how do you finally get to that center of understanding and joy and peace and wisdom, to where even the possibility of suffering is not possible for that consciousness? And that, I think, is the whole idea of what the ultimate goal of real religion is, not just the kinds of religion that just placate, yes, if you're a good boy or girl, you're going to go to heaven, and you'll get patted on the head, and you can get nice food, and everything's gold, and gold dishes, and you can fly around on wings. And, it's kind of a simplistic kind of a thought. It would be pretty boring if that's what, we're still these same people. I'm not sure that's heaven. But if you really understand that we are consciousness, and that this body is just one expression of that consciousness, there's all kinds of options out there. And then there's, beyond having form, and they say that what is the actual essence of our being then? So what is, when it comes down to it, and you boil it, and and you do these chemistry experiments, and you get things down to their basic principles. What is it, our basic principle? And they say it's Sat, Chit, and Ananda. And they say that is the absolute essence of all of our, who we are, all, everything. So Sat, existence. So eternal existence. So this is a non-ending, never possible to be interrupted existence. So even the possibility of some non-existence is not possible. So this is the essence. Chit, consciousness. So this is all kinds of consciousness. Consciousness of unitary consciousness of all potentialities. One ocean, Sri Ramakrishna called it the sea, an endless sea of ocean of consciousness. When he had the experience of Kali, Divine Mother, and we'll talk about how these are expressed in these symbols. But this unlimited consciousness. And that's all the possibility of dual consciousnesses, relative understandings and wisdoms. All the things of expression, divine expression of this understanding of this sea of consciousness. So this is Sat Chit. But this is the key cool one I always love, Ananda, which is bliss. Endless, ever-changing, ever-new joy. The joy of the soul, which is, imagine just being melted in joy, where you as an entity, as a separate entity, you're just melted into that, where there's nothing left of you. You're just the sea of joy itself. And that's what they say we are. So to be able to get to that point of not ever having possibility of suffering again, in one sense, it seems like it's really difficult because you would have to understand that essence. You would have to be aware and existing in that essence all the time. And that seems very difficult if you think about what our normal reality is here, right? What our temporary reality is not so wonderful. We don't have any glimpses of where is this consciousness, this existence, consciousness, and bliss. Where is it? How am I supposed to understand it? And it's kind of funny because there's ways that they're given. There's many paths to reclaiming this heritage, this divine birthright. Swamiji talks about the four paths. You have karma yoga, you have jnana yoga, you have raja yoga, and you have bhakti yoga. Can't forget you have bhakti. So these are practices, kind of practice of these, trying to do that. It's so funny. And then you get to all of these different paths, all these different options that kind of attract you or don't attract you, and you practice them for lifetimes, perhaps. And you have all of these different experiences and all these wonderful different kind of situations, divine romances and so on. And then seems to be passing from one to another. And we come back to where we don't remember these things anymore. And then you have the idea of an Advaitic understanding, like a Ramana Maharshi, that he says, oh yes, he said, the problem is that you just basically took your attention off of, forgot what your reality is. That's never changed though. So that existence, consciousness, and bliss, if that's true at any time, it's true now. If it was ever possible for it not to be true, then it's not true. He said, so that is true now. The only thing you need to do is to realize and accept that. And that takes releasing all the things that are not allowing you to accept that. And that's what he says these paths are. So we have these ideas that we have to attain purity, we have to attain sanctity and holiness, or wisdom, or read all the scriptures, read everything you can think of. That's China taking all this stuff and putting it from the outside in. And that's a real difficult thing if you think that you're lacking to become these by adding to something that doesn't have these already. And so I think a lot of people get very frustrated. So what I thought we'd do today is that we go through all of the different approaches to the divine, assuming the fact that we kind of are these beings that are reflected consciousnesses of an infinite consciousness we just forgot, or this Maya delusion, we're in hypnosis, and somehow some Svengali made us in hypnosis and forget all these things and put us into these horrible states. But I thought I would read some of the things that all of the different great beings have hinted from one level to the next. Starting with basic faith and love, and then going all the way to the idea of thou art that, Ramanas. And the other thing I wanted to mention too today is I want to introduce the Ribu Gita. I did a class on Ashavarka Gita. If you guys, I don't know if you guys were here or not, but that's on my YouTube. It's a 10-part series that I did on the Ashavarka Gita. It was a practical, experiential view of the Ashavarka Gita. So because that is an experiential scripture, it's not one of rationalization, it's not one of conjecture, it's not one of argumentation. It's written from that, thou art that. And every page is that, from that being, your own being communicating with itself. It's a beautiful scripture. The Ripu Gita is very similar, although it's not as known as much as the Ashavarka Gita. Of course, the Ashavarka Gita is not known to the broad masses, but the Ripu Gita was one of Ramana Maharshi's favorite scriptures, and it was read in the ashram there often in his lifetime. And it's also like that. This is the translation that is recommended by Swamiji, Swami Priyanandaji, and others. So we'll do the same kind of a class coming in September on the Ripu Gita. And if you guys, I'll leave this out. You can order it from Amazon because we don't have copies of it here. But if you guys want to follow along in the class, you can do that. What we did with the Ashavarka Gita, because it was Nididhyasana, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. This is the 3 stages of unfolding to wisdom to those. Shravana is hearing something from, hearing something from being. So you're being exposed for the first time to some wisdom. Manana is mind, manas. You're contemplating it. You're turning it over in your mind so that your mind can assimilate it and accept it. And this is a very important part of understanding. So the first part is it's just expressed to you. The second one is that you digest it mentally. You have to kind of bring your mind along to accept these things. Otherwise, you'll never be able to surrender to that truth. Because if your mind's not understanding it, it fights. It fights, usually. Unless you're a very pure being and you can just go beyond the mind. But most of us aren't there, right? So we have to bring the mind along. And it's part of the deal of this. And some scriptures are that way. They're really argumentative. If you've read a lot of Shankara's treatises, he was an amazing dialectic. Nobody could defeat him in argumentation. And there was all these stories of him just defeating everybody left, right, and center. As a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 18-year-old boy, he was destroying up all these huge scholars. And so this is one stage of knowing. But Nididhyasana is the revelation or the experience of this wisdom. And there's certain scriptures that Swami Sarvapriyananda said are Nididhyasana scriptures. And one of them is the Ashavarka Gita, and one of them is the Ripu Gita. So when you read that, it's from the first person. It's that awareness is speaking in you and to you and through you. It's amazing. I love those. It's amazing. So you have to experience them as an experience. So when we did it as a meditation, and I just read it. You can't comment on these things. It's just like God talking. It's the Spirit talking. So why talk over it, right? So what I did was we went to a state of meditation, taught everybody how to do that, become the awareness. And then just let the words flow through your consciousness and just experience them internally without any mind there, without any emotions there. Just experience that wisdom. So that's what we'll do with the Ripu Gita also. So let's talk about, so how does this groping start? So having come to somehow being entrapped in these bodies, forgetting who we are, forgetting that we, not even understanding how to reason and all that. So what is primitive man? What would your reaching out to the divine be like? Well, that we were talking about, they're one step removed from the animal world, being able to perhaps reason a bit and use these, reasoning that is beyond just the experiential but the being able to come up and create new things and new ideas and so on. And this would be the human man. So their idea was they needed protection, they needed food, they needed love, companionship, all these things. And so they reached out to the things in nature that they felt could supply those. So there was the god of the air was the god, the sun was the god, things that they could see. And then they had some abstract gods that were god of love, the goddess of love, or the goddess of abundance or fertility, or So they would have these types of things that were symbols of what they needed. As Swamiji talks about as Yoganandaji. And this is a very beautiful thing. It's a very simple bhakti kind of concept that they're just devoted to these gods and goddesses, and they take care of them. They take care of everybody. And then, of course, there is also a understanding that there was a high state of wisdom on this earth at points where the real understanding of the essence of all of this that we're talking about as far as non-dualism, about the essence of the spirit, was known to a large number of people in the world. It's golden ages. They say the last one was 10,500 BC was the last golden age. And so there is history and understanding that there was a group of beings, or there was a beautiful understanding of true wisdom. And it was taught at some points in very, very kind of commonly to more groups, more people than are now in certain ages. So these essences of truth were given, and not so much the symbols of religion. At the highest ages, there wasn't really needs for that because, when you're plugged into the infinite understanding and essence of wisdom and essence of your own awareness and consciousness, who needs books, right? So this was something. But they say that from 10,500 BC, the ages descend. There was more and more of a descending age because of if you read the Hindu scriptures, the Vedas, they're very complicated about a grand center and the earth going around this grand center. When we're closer to the grand center, we're at a higher age and we have a higher understanding in general. And mankind and its civilizations know all this stuff already. Then as you go away from the grand center, that understanding is clouded more and more until it's pretty much stamped out to have a dark age. Like in 499 AD was considered the last of the deepest dark ages. So all of the deepest wisdom from the earlier civilizations was slowly lost until there was very little of it around. And only in the secret caves of India or some, maybe Tibet and some of these places where there really was these amazing understandings, but then even there, they weren't necessarily fully appreciated and fully understood only by certain enlightened beings. So this is the way that the idea was that this wisdom was there, it was implanted, and it was just lost. And in the West, if you look at the religions that were started, and I did a whole talk on the yugas. If you look at the yugas, look at the Western religions that we have now. We have Christianity. Yeah, sure, Jesus is 33 AD, or 0 to 33, but Christianity as we know it really was formulated up to 300, 400 AD, when all of they finally formalized the different scriptures and they got rid of the esoteric stuff. And so they basically got to what was left over. Islam, it's a good 600 AD. Judaism, the Temple Judaism was destroyed in 79 AD, and Rabbinic Judaism was formulated by 1000 AD. So that came codified and they focused on what Rabbinic Judaism was. So all of the stuff that we have in the Western world was formalizing and really solidified in the darkest of dark ages. Now, if you go back, if you look at Buddhism, if you look at some of the other things, Shankara, when he wrote his treatises and so on, they're a much higher age, even though they're still not really highest ages. But they're echoes of real understanding and wisdom through them, because there are certain beings that transcended the yugas, and Shankara was one of those who had amazing prodigy, spiritual prodigy. you have the Gita, but you have the Vedas, which are very much an earlier echo around, they were saying, 1500 BC, the first time the first Rig Veda was written down. Of course, it's an oral tradition from before that. But so you have India is the oldest continuous civilization in the world. It's contemporary Babylonia and Egypt, ancient Egypt, and all these civilizations that probably had a lot of this wisdom also incorporated in their wisdom theologies, even ancient Greeks and so on. But they all disappeared, and all of their writings or their understandings were repressed or lost completely to humankind. There was a great burning of the library in Alexandria, Egypt. It was such a human tragedy because a lot of the wisdom of the ancient world was there, and it was burned by religious zealots that thought anything that's not in their book shouldn't be allowed to be in any book, so they burned all of it. So this is just the way things are in this world. But this inner understanding, this inner wisdom, that's why I really appreciate Eastern, the Vedas and of course the Upanishads and all these things, because they're echoes of some very deep wisdom. And in India, for some reason, there has been beings that have been there that really have transcended the ages quite often. And there's been a continuous flow of real beings that could give this understanding to certain people around them, and keep it alive, keep this deeper wisdom there, beyond just you're a good boy or a bad girl, you're going to go to heaven, you're going to go to hell. I mean, that's pretty much religion in the rest of the world. I mean, it really is. No matter how you slice it, dice it, or whatever, that's basically what it comes down to in the rest of the world. It's just, you can be good, you can't be bad. And not only that, but you can judge everybody else as bad too. So that makes things even worse. But the truth is, when you look at Christianity, there was some real beautiful deep teachings that were there. Some beautiful stuff there that was lost or repressed or was built around this. Reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever been to Assisi, but it's this beautiful church that St. Francis built with his hands, and it's still there. But they built this huge cathedral all around it, right? So there's this monstrous cathedral with all these stones, and it's dark and Gothic. But when you get inside, there's this little church, and you can go into the pews of St. Francis's church in this beautiful, little church there. And it's protected, but you could just see that this superstructure built around it. It's amazing. And the cave that he lived in too was in that same structure. I don't know if you guys have been there, but it's a very interesting analogy. You have this beautiful St. Francis, who was an amazing saint, who had such love and such divine compassion for all beings and all living creatures. And the church itself really wasn't accepting of him, and even though they worshipped him, or they made him a saint, but almost when you put somebody on a pedestal, on an altar, you kind of sterilize them too, and you make them not relatable to you. So that's kind of a way of putting them out of sight, out of mind too. But this beautiful church in this huge, medieval cathedral, it's just a very big image to me that I thought very interesting. So let's talk about then what is the paths and what do they lead to? So if we consider ourselves needing something to be able to be connected with God, then the Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, the Jnana Yoga, and the Raja Yoga become necessary, and those covers all of those things. And everything can be put into one of those categories. So they say, we have a lot of really selfish desires, a lot of impurities, hatreds, and insecurities, and jealousies, and all these kinds of things. The motivations, have to be changed to be pure again. And so I think Karma Yoga is a very beautiful way of doing that, because a lot of people can't sit down and meditate because they're not there yet. So what are they going to do? You're going to ask somebody to go sit down and meditate for a half an hour to an hour to 2 hours. A lot of people are going to say, can't do it, sorry. I'd shoot myself if I had to be forced to do that. So Karma Yoga is actually a way that if you have all this energy, you can channel it in the right way, and you can do it unselfishly. So without any hope or this hope of reward or return, to do it unselfishly, ideally. Of course, most of us can't do things ideally, but at least you can approach it, right? You can approach it. So this is sweet. Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda is he expresses himself in dualistic terms mostly, although he has talked about non-dualism and all these things, but it was very rare. He mostly was a bhakti, a lover of God, and a yogi. And so when he wrote things, it was a lot of times from that divine lover and beloved relationship. So reading his, it really helps with bhakti, and it helps with the karma yoga, because it's kind of this dualistic primer, if you will. And he said, the love of God, the love of the Spirit, is an all-consuming love. Once you have experienced it, it shall lead you on and on into the eternal realms. That love will never be taken away from your heart. It shall burn there, and in its fire you shall find the great magnetism of spirit that draws others into you and attracts whatsoever you truly need or desire. So this is a beautiful idea. So this is interesting, because if you're needing something, and all of us have needs, how do you go about getting it? You know, do you conquer, or you go take it from somebody, you hit them over the head, you know? What's the spiritual way of being able to attract these things to you? Well, you know, there's spiritual laws that, again, we're talking about the weapons for the field of battle. Unconditional giving sets up unconditional receiving. So if you don't look for a return, if you do it unconditionally, it actually sets up a spiritual dynamic that makes the returning energy, the energy flow 10 times or more greater than what you're actually putting out. Because, and if you're not looking for a specific way it will return to you, it'll come to you in the best way that can be possible for you, even though if we're not understanding that yet. We may think it should be this, but in actuality, there should be this or this. You know, we're not really able to understand that. So when he talks about this idea of bhakti, even in the karma yoga, you do it with love. And what Sri Ramakrishna had done with Swamiji was show that when you're doing anything in this world unconditionally, you're serving God himself. Because in every body that you are doing anything with, that is God. That is your God. Not just a form of God, not as some kind of echo, but that is God itself. And to a divine being, that is true. To us, you know, we have to kind of prime ourselves a little bit to kind of remember that. But the truth of the best way of doing karma yoga is to actually do it because you're worshiping God in that person. You're doing it for God directly. And that's what Sri Ramakrishna's difference was in the idea of karma yoga. So this idea of love, pure love, when you're doing, you know, consumed with this in this bhakti. And if you want to create, if you're at a deficit, the best way of changing it is to start initiating giving. It's kind of a counterintuitive for a lot of people, right? Because if you're poor and you're, you know, really having problems, the best way to change that whole situation is figure out some way to give, some way to offer the energy out unconditionally, some way of starting the process. You can't start the process by taking. It doesn't work. It just leads to lower and lower results. And there is a magnetism, and this is the highest age, one of the higher ages, in fact, that they talk about divine magnetism, to be able to attract to you that which you need. So what Yoganandaji had talked about in other places is that if you do these unconditional energy, if you put out unconditional energy, it opens a return that anything you need will be drawn to you or created for you to be able to attain whatever it is that you truly need, if it's the highest goal for the best of all concerned, if this is your ideal for your family or for, you know, your neighborhood or your church or whatever it is that you're needing. And of course, you're going to be taken care of in that sense. You know, you have needs, and those things will be met. So if you're talking about mentoring somebody who has a real problem with money or always is broke or anything like that, the best way to try to counsel them is to show them how to do something to give. You know, they can go and do some physical thing for some homeless, or, you know, even if they're homeless themselves. I would even go that far. Even if they're homeless themselves, if they went and served in the, and of course they'll feed them too. But because I see so many people on the streets, I'd love to help them all. I wish I had the money to do that. But that in itself may not help, because if the energy of mind is I don't know how to say it, but is hoarding, is just focused on your own self. Anything that's given to that person will be bouncing off, because the energy can't be absorbed, it can't be received. Their same pattern will continue, and they'll still have, even if you get, that's why people that won the lottery, a lot of times, if you look at their stories, if they were poor before, after they won the lottery, they'd be poor again in some years, because the same habits and patterns were existing in them, whether they had money or they did not. So this is really, really key, that anybody has the power to change their lives. Anybody has the power to make a difference. And how good it feels for them to do something for someone, that they have something to give. Because feeling like you matter and you have something to give is one of the basic needs of human being, of humanity. It's a real deep-seated need to know that you have something that is worthy to give. And this is something that you can do. So Karma Yoga has a lot of different strata, a lot of different beauty to it. And combining it always with bhakti is really key, because that's where that pure giving comes from, that pure love. We connect into that pure love. Bhakti is so beautiful. All of these, I wasn't born into a Hindu family. Matter of fact, they thought, the end of the world came when I was going into an ashram when I was 20 years old. And I was leaving in astrophysics. I was an astrophysicist, and I was going to leave school and become a monk. So they kind of thought the whole world ended at that. And of course, I wasn't into the images at that point. We were doing meditation, a lot of meditation. But it was completely foreign to their idea. But what I found to me is that it opened up my heart in a way that it wasn't open. You have these relationships with your mother, father, friends, and all these things. And they're always kind of a give and take. There are always some beautiful parts to it. And there's always some things that, human beings are human beings, and they don't do everything perfectly. And you have some hurts. Almost in every possible relationship, there's going to be some things that are not great, or horrible in some cases. In the case of having an ishta, a form of the divine that you can have a relationship with, you can create a safe space to have your heart expand for the first time, and not be vulnerable to having it stepped upon by this, that, or the other person or circumstances. And it's a beautiful, beautiful path. And but what's wonderful is that there are those beings that have manifested in physical forms that have lived extraordinary lives. And there's many. There's so many. You could choose any one that really relates to you, strikes home. But they have shown an amazing life of such compassion, such giving, such other, beyond their own self needs, that they just were able of a pure being of light that could give that kind of love. And that if you have that, if you're drawn to that kind of a ishta, a form of the divine in any way that you would want to, it really can create that ability for your heart to expand in a safe space. And that is a reflection of what? Ananda. What is already there. That's all that is. So in all of our worship, we take the deity or the divinity from our heart, and we put it into the image, and we awaken it, and we worship it there, and then we place it back in our heart. That's the tradition in Indian bhakti. So this is the formal way of doing worship. But there's a deep, deep meaning there, something deep and profound, and that is at the center of our being, you go beyond all of this, and you are that love. At first, you love Divine Mother. Then you're connected to Divine Mother, and she's your mother. But then you become Divine Mother. And then there's only one. And that's the ultimate pinnacle of bhakti worship, as Sri Krishna has described it, as the pinnacle of the mountain. So then you go into realizing that this whole love that you felt was just part of your own being. And it was an expression of that which thou art. And so it's easy. Jnana yoga is more rarefied. Jnana yoga, to be able to, and it has some pitfalls. Jnana yoga is that ability to use the mind and use the reasoning and create a higher level to tap into real wisdom, unlimited wisdom. And there's amazing scriptures that go from Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, and can really open up the whole world. I'm sure you've all read books that opened up things up for you. So if you listen to Swami Sarvapriyananda, there's people who really study Advaita and study all of the Upanishads and all the Vedas. And they can really give you some amazing things. The problem is you can get caught in a mental loop with it and keep it intellectual. And then it doesn't do anything for you. It hasn't touched your heart, hasn't touched your being, and haven't opened yourself up to it. It's another personality. We all have these false personalities. And that's what this is. It's a totally made up dual personality that is relative. It has no substantial anything. It's scary, but that's the truth. But it creates another one, another spiritual, I have all this wisdom, I know all this stuff, and I can recite all these scriptures, and and the problem is that it will keep you, that's a barrier that keeps you from experiencing it, to get to Nididhyasana. So manana can be a real problem if you can be a loop for incarnations. The same thing with they say the astral world and dreaming. You create all this beautiful music and dreaming and all these worlds and all this light, but you could do that for lifetimes, it's eons, and then you haven't turned inside. You haven't turned to see what the reality is. That's what Swamiji said. He said, I went all over India. My head was bleeding from bowing to everything because I found I was worshiping everything divine. And he said, I found no peace. For a little while, I'd find a little peace. He said, it wasn't until I turned within, finally, he said, then I found. And that led to the peace. That led to the goal of what he wanted to. And that's the truth. That's, all of these things we're doing, at some point, Sri Kishore wrote a book called The Holy Science. It's an amazing book. It's thick. It has the whole spiritual possibility of it on there. It talks about the yugas, the holy science. Yeah, I'll show you. I can show you a copy. You can take a picture of it. But the yugas that I talked about, that's a footnote in that book. A footnote in that book that gives you an idea. He was an incarnation of divine wisdom, amazing being. The last sentence, he said, after all of these things of Om, meditating on Om and going into the physical, the astral, causal worlds and all these things, at the last moment, you give up the vain idea of separate existence, and then you release that and become the whole enchilada, if you please. You become the whole. That's the last line of this book, the whole path of everything. And the same thing that Ramana says. He says you go through all of these different paths and all of these different sadhanas to make you, and I'll read something from him that I think you'll find interesting. But just to make you realize that you are that. You've always been that. You've never not been that. You really didn't need any of this stuff. It was just allow yourself to accept it. To be pure enough to accept it. Okay, let's read something from Swamiji. This is interesting. This is kind of goes along with what I'm saying here. I agree with you so far that faith is a wonderful insight and that it alone can save. But there is the danger of breeding fanaticism and barring further progress. Jnana, knowledge, is all right, but there is the danger of becoming dry intellectualism. Love is great and noble, but it may die away in meaningless sentimentalism. A harmony of all of these is the thing required. Ramakrishna was such a harmony. Such beings are few and far between, but keeping him and his teachings as the ideal, we can move on. And if amongst us, each one may not individually attain to that perfection, still we may get it collectively by counteracting, equiposing, adjusting, and fulfilling one another. This would be harmony by a number of persons and a decided advance on all other forms and creeds. That's Swamiji. And that was from 1894 in Chicago, by the way. That wasn't late in his life. That was right after he came to America. He said those things. it was interesting. Swamiji, this is something that you guys might, and it's known in the order. But when Swami Vivekananda came, he was the first great master to bring this time capsule of amazing wisdom to the rest of the world, the Western world, the rest of the world. And because the Western world loved it and appreciated it, Indians started thinking, oh, maybe we got something here. So they actually started really looking at it there. But he did not come and talk about Ramakrishna. He almost never mentioned him. One time in all the time he was here, he talked about Sri Ramakrishna. He always talked about the Vedas or the four yogas and Upanishads, these kinds of things. When he was in Harvard Divinity School giving lectures and talking to all these amazing luminaries of the time. And his brother disciples were actually quite peeved about that. They said, why aren't you talking about Sri Ramakrishna? And he said, who are you to tell me? He goes, have any of you understood Ramakrishna? And he said, I myself haven't understood Ramakrishna. How am I supposed to talk about him? So, but he didn't want to create just another sect, just another religion of, oh yes, here's somebody we can bow to, and another external, right? But what's different about Sri Ramakrishna, obviously, is that there is that automatic turning within. When you get into his teachings and readings of what he said, he automatically turns you into favor with his teachings. So it's a little different in that sense too. But that wasn't until the Gospel of Sri Krishna came out, which was much later in this whole thing. It wasn't in the beginning. It was almost right before Swamiji left his body was when that book came out. And you know that. I don't know if you know about the Gospel of Ramakrishna written by. Okay, now let's go into the Divine Mother's wisdom. And this is Anandamoy Ma. I got to tell you, Anandamoy Ma is such an amazing being. I mean, this is one of the few beings that didn't ever have a sadhana, never had a guru, an external guru, never had a teacher, but had wisdom. And from her birth, she basically expressed that from her birth, she knew who she was, she knew what was going on, and that's what she's told everyone. When I was born in this world, I was the same. When they married this body, I was the same. Before this birth, I was the same. And before you now, I am the same. Evermore I shall be the same, whether this whole world ebbs and flows. He said something about the changing world, she'll still be the same. So these are the kind of beings that are on this earth, and a lot of them are actually hidden. They don't even, they're not written about, and they're not even, but there are those beings that actually create these energies here that are not known, but of these that we know. This is what Ma says, talking about Karma Yoga. She goes, egoless work is full of beauty, for it is not prompted by a desire for self-gratification. So long as the knots that constitute the ego are not unraveled, even though you intend to act impersonally, you will get hurt. Your selfishness will also be seen in the expression of your eyes and face, and be apparent in your entire being. So this is so beautiful. So, we're talking about selfless work. You really have to go within and understand what it is that we are. And know that by opening yourself up to the selfless work, you'll see the reaction to it. Like if people are put off by a lot of what you do, you have to really kind of look and see, is it really hidden with some kind of a selfish desire, even to be thought of as a wonderful person, as to be, oh, this is such a nice person, they're doing all these things. That's the danger of it. There's so many ways the ego can infiltrate this whole thing. And now we can go into Srirona. So we have all of these beautiful paths, but then at certain times there's a being like Srimana. Also the same thing with Srirona as Anandamoy Ma, although it was a little later at age 16. He just had a spontaneous awakening. He just knew that he was the self. And he had a near-death experience, basically. I don't know. If you ever read Ramana's life, you might want to read a book there's one called Self-Realization. There's a few. But Self-Realization was written by one of those who was around him and confirmed these things in his book with Ramana, so it's accurate. And you can get it. It's a beautiful book on Amazon. I got it in India, but it's available anywhere. It's just called Self-Realization. And Ramana, he saw his body dying. He lay down and it became stiff, and breath stopped and became blue. And he saw that, thought, okay, they're going to take my body to the funeral pyre and burn the body, but I'm not the body. He saw that the emotions were irrelevant. They were just fleeting. So not the emotions, the mind, the thoughts were. And he went beyond that, and he realized that he was the self. And for the rest of his life, he was established as the self. And after that, and this was in his uncle's house, and he was getting ready to go to school, and basically he wrote a letter, took some money out of the tiffin box, and jumped on a train, and he heard this name Arunachala from a relative, and he thought that wasn't a real place. And when the guy said, "Oh, I just came from Arunachala," because that was a very sacred place in Indian philosophy. So Arunachala, which is in Tirumalai, the city is Tirumalai, mountainous hill mountain is Arunachala. And they consider Arunachala to be a living Shiva, a living unified awareness, non-dual energy, and just absorbs and creates that non-dual energy into all those beings who are lucky to live around it. So the sadhus go there and just kind of live their whole lives around the mountain and bowing to it like Shiva. And I've been blessed to be there for 4 years on and off, and it's just amazing. And so he went there as a 16-year-old youth. He looked so young and so beautiful, and basically threw all the rest of his money away, threw all his clothes away, and then they made him, actually the ladies finally, after he was just sitting there in samadhi for days, they put a little strip of cloth around, and that's all he had worn all his life. So he went into the temple, he bowed to Arunachala Shiva, which was in the temple, and he stayed there all his life. And he was Mana. He didn't speak for 3 years or so. He was just in a state of samadhi, this young boy, and all the sadhus around him. A few saw what he was and where he was, where his state of consciousness was. But when he finally started to be more responsive, somebody wrote, and he wasn't speaking still, but somebody wrote this conjecture, 13 or 14 questions for him. And there's a little book called Who Am I? And that's the answers that he gave. The first outward teaching he gave to the world was the written responses to those answers. And they're so beautiful and clear. If you want to know who you are, it's very simple. You just read that book, and it's like the Ashtavarka Gita. And everything else is just, all the rest of his life, he answered a lot of questions. He never wrote a book. He was mostly silent. And people would come and ask, and he would always respond. But he would always turn them back to those same principles, that same reality, and that little pamphlet that you guys can get. I'll buy a bunch of them when I go to India. I'm going back in August, July and August, so I'll buy a bunch of them and bring them back from India. So you'll have the energy from Arunachala. By the way, some of these images were carved from Arunachala Mountain. Right. This Shiva Lingam, by generations of these guys who are carvers there, for generations of family, all of them are carvers. The Om symbol, this is Arunachala Mountain. All the pretending to see it. It was a gift. The Shiva Lingam with Arunachala Mountain, that's carved out of Arunachala by those guys. And the Babaji image and Ramana image are carved out of Arunachala Mountain. So, and they say Ramana was an incarnation of Arunachala Mountain, because he lived there all his life until 1950. Neither caves, or they finally built an ashram for him, or it was a small ashram there. So this is from Ramana. There is neither past nor future. There is only the present, and even the present is mere imagination. For the sense of time is purely mental. Space is similarly mental. Therefore, birth and rebirth, which take place in time and space, cannot be other than imagination. I tell you, when you go to his samadhi, they have his body's buried. You don't burn a saint; they have a samadhi. They guard everything, and then they worship there, and the samadhi's there in the ashram. You just go and they just sit near his samadhi. It's right by Arunachala Mountain. It's not a bad place to be. Okay, here's Ramana again. Nirvana, which is the idea of this perfect non-dualistic state. Nirvana is that state wherein the sense of separateness does not exist, and where the ego has sunk in its source, the heart. Nirvana is the perfect state. There is neither seeing, hearing, nor experiencing in it. There is nothing but pure I am awareness. Well, they used to say the best name for God is I am, or I am that I am. And so and that's in the Jewish, Exodus, the Jewish Torah.
So we'll definitely go into the Rebbe Gita.
We don't have time today, but we'll go into the Rebbe Gita when I get back from India in September. We'll do a series of classes. We can do the same thing we did with Yasha Rebbe Gita. Okay, so what we'll do is, I know that was a lot, but we'll finish now. And what we'll do is we'll just do a short meditation. Since there's some new people here, I'll give the meditation of how to do the Soham and how to become the awareness. The idea is eventually in meditation with Jnana, which is Jnana Yoga, and the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, to go beyond identification of the body, go beyond the identification of the emotions, go beyond the identification of the mind, and any sense of separateness as we go beyond, until we are pure awareness, just that awareness. Ramana said, before Om, there is Amkara, that's separateness. Amkara is ego, that's separate awareness. And then so before Om was creation, and Amkara follows from, Om follows from that ego, that first primal I am, awareness, separate awareness. So he said to go into, you just follow that backwards. You find that source of who am I? What is the source of my awareness? Where does this awareness from? He said if you try to find the ego, you'll realize that it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. It's purely an artificial construct. It's not anything. He said then all thoughts stop, and then there's pure stillness, pure awareness. So to approximate that, there's actually a meditation that Sarvapriyananda gave, which was from Kashmiri Shaivism, and it's also something Yogananda gave in a slightly different fashion. And I can't tell you about Yogananda's, but I can give you Sarvapriyananda's version of it. And this is where you use pranayama. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are yama niyama, so do the things you should do, don't do the things you shouldn't do. Because if you're out of sorts with your own moral compass, then there's always this uneasiness, and you can't meditate deeply if that's the case. So you get right with your own self. It's basically how that works. Then asana, learning how to sit properly, because the idea in the physical body is that you want to keep your spine straight, and not, if you're sitting on a chair, don't lean against the back of it, just come forward a bit of it. The feet flat on the floor. If you're sitting on the ground, then it's easier. I usually do half lotus, but as the spine is getting older, I can only do it for an hour or so. So it's not what it is. But the idea is to keep the spine straight, because there's subtle currents in the spine, and where the energy in the spine is, there's the state of consciousness. The first three chakras, the base of the spine, are pure survival instinct. So it's procreation, it's survival, it's the procreative idea, and emotional state of the stomach. So if you're stuck in those kind of feelings and thinkings, then that's an indication that you're in the lower chakras. Once that energy gets in the spine and the Shoshona goes up the spine and into the heart center, that's the beginning of spirituality, opening up the heart center. That's why there's a couple dual ideas of heart. First is the heart of the heart center, then there's the heart, which is the essence, the center of our being. But to get to the heart center, that's what opens up the whole feeling sense. That's what pierces you and just saturates you. And that's what changes your actions and your thoughts and purifies. And so they say once the energy and the Brahman energy sets this too, once you get to the heart center, you start seeing that light and feeling that peace and that joy and that love. So getting the energy up to the spine, into the heart center is really the key. And then from there, that unity goes higher and higher and deeper. So the throat center, when Sri Ramakrishna describes this in the gospel, he talks about the devotee only can't speak of anything, but the expression is of unity. So he said, you can't speak of anything but God. So the idea is that you have a pure expression, you have the pure being. Then, as the energy goes up to Ajna chakra, point between the eyebrows, then you see God, you see the self from a distance. There's a slight partition, there's a slight separation when you're truly in the Ajna chakra. And there's meditations where you really want to focus on this point between the eyebrows, because automatically that'll start bringing the energy up the spine. If you're focused purely in the point between the eyebrows, in a sense of awareness, and feeling the heart and the energy going from the heart up through to the third eye, and then generally people can pierce through the third eye. But then you see God from a distance, that partition, like Sri Krishna talks about, just a thin veil between you and the Lord, and you become a little mad to raise to Him, which you can't quite reach it because there's a veil, that small partition. It's duality still, and that's actually the essence of that chakra. Then on the top, the thousand petal lotus, Shashara, that is where there's unity, Shiva consciousness, where you are actually absorbed into that oneness. So there is no two, there's only one. And that's the center, top of the head. That's why you'll see in the pujas, we always put a flower on our head or we touch our head when we're talking about that part of the puja where we are Soham, I am. So that is that ideal there. So this is the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And part of it is then asana, sitting there. So sit with if you're on a chair, sit with your feet flat on the floor, your palms upward if you can. You can put them in your lap if you want to as well, but this is kind of simple. And your chest kind of forward, your shoulders back, because that straightens the spine. And keep your chin parallel to the floor, because that's a way to keep your spine straight. And then just slowly raise the gaze. Like if you keep your eyes open for a second and raise the gaze just to the point of the eyebrows, not straining. But just if you're focused there, then you can close them or you can keep them half open. And that's what usually the normal posture of the yogi is. And if you keep that point focused, just always remember to check your eyes, because Yoganandaji was very clear about this too. All the yogis talk about this. But if your eyes go downward, you're going to fall asleep. That's the subconscious mind. If the eyes are forward, that's your normal waking mind, and you'll think a lot. Your mind will be active. But if you keep the eyes upturned and focus at the point between the eyebrows, that'll go into superconsciousness, and then you can go beyond thought, beyond feeling, into this awareness consciousness of the moment. And then finally, there's Patanjali says from asana, you go to pranayama. And this is a combination, so some people consider breathing exercises, but it's really not. Prana means energy, and the energy is enlivening the full body. The Ida Pingala, on the right side and left side of the spine, is when you breathe in, Ida, the energy comes up, breathe out, Pingala. And this is why the energy is generally in a peripheral part of the spine. It's just on the outward of the spine, and even then it can have an effect. But at the base of the spine, Sushumna begins, in the triangular place there, coiled up, is the Kundalini energy coiled up at the base of the spine. And as the energy gets focused, and the point between the eyebrows, you focus it, it'll pierce into that Kundalini, into the bottom of the spine, and start awakening the chakras. Ramakrishna described it in the gospel as the flowers that were drooping. And then once that energy hit that petal of that lotus, the flower would bloom and turn upward. And that's what he saw it usually that way. That's why they call them lotuses, but they're energy centers, and they have colors and patterns of light to those sensitive enough to see them. And so you'll see as the energy, even at the base of the spine, when it turns and goes up, instead of this consciousness of energy going outward to my trying to be alive and my self-preservation, you turn inward and you become completely not concerned about any of that energy at all. It becomes purified. And your self-preservation is, you are that. There's no reason to be worried about it. And then to the lotus, the next lotus organs of regeneration or procreation, that becomes purified. And instead of going outward trying to create or have sexual thoughts, it turns inward into pure blissful energy. And that energy becomes very, very powerful to go further up the spine to the third chakra, which is the emotional chakra. And then it purifies the emotions completely. So all of these divine emotions now become pure and calm. The lake of the emotions becomes just calm, lake of the mind. Again, when the energy then goes up to the heart center, Sri Ramakrishna said, he just said, Ami, Ami. He said he saw all light, all joy. This. A lot of people describe getting into that heart center as you feel like you're at home, because this is such a beautiful place, just a contented place. Some people get stuck there a long time because it's so blissful and so you have really very little desire for anything else. But then if you go beyond that, like Sri Krishna was talking about, to the throat center, you go into that center where you go beyond that center of duality into a more unitary throat energy where there's all expresses as one. And then at the point between the eyebrows, truly there is a thin partition between you and that full ocean of awareness. And you are just a bubble in the sea of awareness, of consciousness, floating in joy, bliss, just absorbed in this joy and bliss. And of course, there's still that separation, there's still two. And then finally, once that is given up and gone beyond, then there's one that sea of ocean, joy, quenching, everlasting consciousness of love, peace, and so we'll do a pranayama to be able to bring that energy inside the spine, and it helps us to focus the mind as well. So what we'll do first is we're going to do breathing in through the mouth in a double inhalation like this. And when you do it, you're going to do it to a count of 7. And if you can hold it longer, that's great. But inhale for a count of 7. At the same time when you're inhaling, tense the whole body. And inhale till the count of 7. Then you just hold it for the same length of time. So that would be 7. And keep that tension in the body. And then you exhale through the mouth with a double exhalation for the same count of 10. And that really gets the energy flowing inside, and it also gets rid of all the tension of the body, so you can not have any effect on the body. Eventually you'll find that the next step is pratyahara, which is interiorization, and the body will be like it's numb. You barely feel it. It just becomes like somebody gave it a shot of Novocaine. And it becomes numb, and eventually you won't even feel it at all. And that's where it's so much easier. You don't hear anything, all the senses are turned off. And then after you exhale, you're going to just watch the breath. When the breath of its own, don't try to control the breath, just watch it. On its own, when it comes in, without you breathing in and out, you're going to just mentally chant so on the incoming breath. Then when the breath stays, just don't do anything, enjoy the peace. And when the breath on its own accord goes out, and it'll just be a faint breath going in and out of your nose, hum. So on the incoming breath, hum. And don't control the breath. Just feel like you're watching somebody else breathe. And just keep that going for a little while until you see that you are at awareness in the field of energy of touching. So let's do that. We're going to do the breathing exercise 3 times. So we're going to breathe in for a count of 7, hold for a count of 7, exhale for a count of 7 3 times. Remember, inhale double through the nose, exhale double exhalation, and we should hear your breath. If you don't do it deeply, it's not going to give you the same effect. So actually, we should all be doing it and hearing it together. Okay, so we'll do it in unison. So let's begin. Ready? Here we go. Inhale. Tense the body. Hold. Exhale. Releasing all that tension. One more time, inhale. Tense the body.
Hold. Exhale. One more time. Inhale. Rinse the body. Hold. Exhale. Release all the tension. Now just watch the breath, and on its own accord, it comes in. Mentally chant so. And on its own accord, it goes out. So anxiety.
Maybe we'll finish real quickly with the chanting of Ramakrishna Sharana. Because we should have a call from India coming in from Prabhuji as well. So if anybody wants some seeds or play along. Usual. Usual implements.
I just don't want to, because I'm too close to the,
Yeah, the mic.
yeah.
That could be okay, right?
It's the key, right? It's been a month. Ramakrishna Sharanam, Ramakrishna Sharanam, Ramakrishna Sharanam, Sharade Prabhu. Ramakrishna Sharanam, Ramakrishna Sharanam, Ramakrishna Sharanam, Sharade. Vipali Kevalam, Vipali Kevalam, Vipali Kevalam, Sharade. Vipali Kevalam, Vipali Kevalam, Vipali Kevalam, Jai Jai Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanam, Prabhu Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanam. Sharanagatuham, 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 Shanti. Sharanagatuham, 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 Shanti. Jai Jai Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanti Prabhu Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanti. Namo Sri Gurave, Namo Sri Gurave, Namo Sri Gurave, Namo Namo, Namo Sri Gurave, Namo Sri Gurave, Namo Sri Gurave, Namo Namo. Jai Jai Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanam Prabhu Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanam. Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya, Krishna Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya, Ram Krishna Krishna Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya, Ram Krishna Jaya, Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya, Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya, Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya, Ram Krishna Jaya Jaya, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanam Prabhu Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanam Prabhu Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Ram Krishna Sharanam, Sharanam. can put some